Don't use the lifts, go down to the stairs and go to Queen Victoria's statue. May I also draw your attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. All right? Okay. Oh. From a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting room, and recording will be on the Council's website. The camera will mainly capture the backs of anyone making deputations, but there will be some footage of them as they approach and leave the table where the microphones are located, and of people entering or leaving the room whilst the meeting is in progress. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. And can I ask everyone, as always, to use the microphones when you wish to speak. I think I'm going to go around the table and ask people to introduce themselves, if that's okay. I'm Leo Madden, and I'm Chair of the Governance, Audit and Standards Committee.
Councillor Hugh Mason, Councillor for St Jude Ward.
Councillor Judith Smythe, Councillor for St Jude Ward.
Councillor Donna James, Conservative Group Leader.
Councillor Terry Norton at Drayton and Farlington Ward.
Councillor John Ferret, Independent Councillor Paulsgrove.
Tristan Samuels, Director of Regeneration.
Ian Fitchett, Electoral Services Manager.
Michelle Love, Safer Travel Manager, Regeneration.
James Roberts, Transport Operations Manager, Regeneration.
Greg Povey, Assistant Director, Procurement.
Charlotte Smith, Assistant Director, Communications and Customer Services.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor.
David White, External Audit Manager for Ernst & Young.
Stephen Williams, Director of Portico.
Peter Bell, Steady Solicitor. Apologies, Leo, for lateness.
Stuart Aglen, Local Democracy Manager.
Anna Martin, Local Democracy Officer.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see so many people attending a meeting at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Could I welcome, for the first time I've ever seen them here, could I welcome Councillor Donna Jones, who's a standing deputy, as she says, and Councillor Norton.
I was on GNA for years before you chaired it, I can assure you.
Oh, no, for the first meeting since I've been chairing it. Yeah, absolutely. I was on it years ago as well. It was exciting even in those days. There is a deputation from a Mr. Jerry Brown, which he's handed to Councillor Hugh Mason, and if Hugh's happy to do that, we can hear his deputation. Yes.
Mr. Brown's deputation is as follows. This deputation is about item 5, review of polling districts and polling places. I have been to most polling stations in the city during elections, and there are some welcome improvements in this set of changes. There is one other change I would ask for, please. Polling District LE is a porter cabin at Blakemere Crescent in Paulsgrove. I absolutely see the need for a polling station there. At most recent elections, I have been to that station. The quality of the station is low. If there is rain or fog, there is a slip hazard on the entranceway. The facilities for the officers at the station are relatively poor, an outside chemical toilet, and the overall space is low. The electricity is provided by a generator, and, depending on wind direction, the exhaust fumes of the generator are blown into the polling station. I would ask that a bigger porter cabin be provided with better lighting, safer access, and a south-facing window to allow more light into the building. I would also ask that the officers be provided with a microwave oven in which they may warm up food or drinks. That's it.
Oh, short and sweet, thank you. And thank you, Jerry, if you're watching. Ian, you'll pick up those points then. Thank you. Sorry, I'm remiss of me today. I was at a meeting this morning and the same thing happened. I've done the apologies. Declarations of members' interest, any? No? Okay, thank you. I'm going to go through the minutes of the previous meeting. Tristan, this one I'll pick up the homeschool transport. Okay, to save you having to hang about. So we'll pick it up from the minutes if that's okay, right? So, can we go through them page by page for accuracy and matters arising? Okay, so I'm going to do the big page number. Page 5 Page 6. Oh, actually, do you want to say? I've forgotten why we've been invited. It was something to do with the £30,000 limit, right? Please come in, and we can sort you out now, and you can go.
Okay, first of all, I think it's, I've been thrown a little bit at the deep end, but I just want to understand why you think the procurement of £30,000 is too much for Portico Shipping Limited.
I think as I understand it, and Audit will tell me, it's more than any other of the sections. Is that correct? I can't remember why this is brought up, but it's more than any other part of the council can do.
Okay. Firstly, to explain, I think in a commercial world, you've got to be ready at a minute's notice. We work on a 24/7 operation, and our customers work on a 24/7 operation. I think just to try and explain the reason why we need up to £30,000. A few weeks ago, we had a motor go on one of the cranes, and the crane's worth £3 million, and the motor was round about £20,000. Now, if we were to go out to procurement, that would then put that crane out for days. We can't afford, as a commercial port, to lose that. We are battling against places like Southampton. Previously working for ABP, I know their procurement level is at 100,000. That's not to say that we should be at 100,000. But to keep us on the same playing field as a company like ABP of Southampton, especially Southampton, who we're battling against on a daily basis for business, we need the ability to pick the phone up and order something instantly, because that machine cannot be sat idle for days on end, because we are only a small company, we have only got limited equipment, we have only got limited stores, so we don't carry massive spares on site, and we have to have that ability to go out and buy equipment on a minute's notice and get delivery on a minute's notice.
Liz, so there are checks and balances on that then, are there?
Yes, I think it's for Portico and for the board of directors to manage the risks that are associated with having that volume or that level. And as long as they are satisfied with that, then yeah, it is a high level, but there are conditions kind of around it, and it's also about the transparency perhaps that they have when there is any instances of multiple kind of instances of just below the threshold. So as long as they have compensating controls, and I'm sure Steve can communicate any compensating controls, then it would be fine. I think you raised it because it is not the norm for elsewhere, and you were questioning around whether that was acceptable or not.
Yeah, Councillor Jones.
Thank you much, Chair. I would support what Steve has proposed or reported back to Governance and Audit today. It's neither personal nor pecuniary, because I'm a council appointed director of Portico. But I think the key thing, and what we've realised with winning new business, is that the business being very agile, so being able to work very quickly, sometimes you'll get a call and within 48 hours or even 24 hours, can you take this ship, can it come in, it's got fresh produce on it. So the business being able to work very quickly is key to us going from the red to the black. And you'll remember the council having owned the business now for 11 years. The council's direct through members' involvement used to be quarterly at best. It's now every single month, and the board of the company is very small, it's very tight, and we get a report from Steve and from Mike Sellers every single month on exactly what's going on, and any health and safety issues or any mechanical, anything like that. I feel very confident that we are absolutely on top of stuff now, and I think it's the best it's ever been in terms of the relationship between PCC and Portico.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments, any members? Well, thank you for coming, and it was just to give us an explanation. I'm sure everything is wonderful between the council and Portico, it always is. But thank you very much for coming, and I fully accept your explanation. Thank you. Page 6. Jump in if you need to. Page 7. Page 8, at the very top of page 8, Tristan, is and thank you very much for coming as well, is the home to school transport. Are you aware of the concerns raised, particularly about police checks? Oh, yeah. Can I hand over the floor to you then?
Yes, Chair. Firstly, just to say that Mike Stoneman would have liked to have been here. Obviously, we provide a service on behalf of Children's Services, which is the home to school transport. Mike's done a short note, which, if you're okay, I'll read to the group. Obviously, we provide a service on their behalf. And it provides a bit of context in terms of what we do as well. So Home to Schools Transport Service carries around 209,000 pupils' journeys per year. The allocation of bus passes and provision of Portsmouth City Council owned and contracted out minibuses and taxi services. In the academic year 2018-19, there was one complaint relating to the safeguarding of a child. After investigation, the complaint was withdrawn. There have been 3 other complaints relating to the safeguarding which have been logged and resolved since 2014. The current system to obtain taxi plate license within PCC is to provide evidence of enhanced DBS checks, including adult and children barred lists. For drivers that are licensed with Hampshire County Council, confirmation that their licensing team has been sent a copy of the enhanced DBS is obtained by PCC's Home to School Transport team. In addition, there are 105 PCC employed passenger assistants who accompany children under the age of 11 and those over 11 with greatest additional needs. These members of staff are also subject to an enhanced DBS check and ensure that there is no need for the pupil to have direct contact with the driver. The passenger assistant can also report any incidents that appear to be out of the ordinary and make decisions not to use the transport if they believe that there is a child at risk. The list of the drivers that internal audit require cannot be obtained in an acceptable format to internal audit because of the majority of the operators have stated that the information is not available to them, i.e. they do not take individual DBS checks from a driver. They take taxi plates as confirmation and the licensing authority has carried out its statutory duty to check. The Home to School Transport team would carry out annual reconciliation of driver records as per the audit recommendation. On balance, education is satisfied with the level of assurance. That's from Children's Services, obviously, Mike, and I was very conscious we didn't want to come here and not represent them as we are providing their service, and as I said, he sends his apologies. The reality of the report is there is a lack of assurance from an audit perspective, and I think we should probably take that and look at those issues together here and discuss that in terms of a balance between risk and the likelihood of something out of the ordinary and terrible happening.
Well, this has risen several times, I have to say, and clearly there's concern from us, and I suspect the whole of the council, about children being transported by people who may not have had a check. There's also, as well as the DBS, I mean, the last report I got is the 26th of July, and I tore it out of my last papers. Issues were raised in respect of 5 out of 22, 23% of drivers, and 8 out of 108, 7% of passenger assistants to whom current DBS checks could not be located. So I don't know that people have had checks and can't find them or whatever. You've got to tell us who's incumbent upon to make sure that whoever's taking our children to and from school, in fact, are safe people. And I haven't got that today, Tristan.
Since that report on the 26th of July, we now have 100% of the DBS checks. So we've had confirmation from Hampshire County Council, who licensed Pete's Airlink and AMK, which are the minibus providers that are based in East Hampshire. And we have DBS, obviously, all of our PCC licensed taxi drivers have to present an enhanced DBS check to get their taxi plate, and all of our passenger assistants and minibus drivers now have up-to-date DBS checks.
So that's 100%, Michelle, yeah?
Yeah, so over the last 3 months, that's been our main priority, to make sure that all of the drivers, passenger assistants, everybody that comes into contact with our children that are on statutory entitled transport have DBS checks.
Okay, sorry, I'll come in a minute, yeah. Right, the other issue raised was about insurance, okay? And we weren't convinced that everybody who was fully insured. In fact, records showed that, well, whatever evidence was given to us didn't prove to us that that everybody had the proper insurance, which has to be provided. I don't know if that. Now, I don't know, Tristan. This is probably something to do with licensing rather than yourselves, or indeed the education department section. But nevertheless, have you looked at this insurance to make sure that everybody's got the proper insurance to take these children to and from school?
So, obviously licensing aren't here, so it wasn't licensing. There were a lot of staff changes within the team, so we do know that there were some records that weren't kept up to date. However, we have got now staff that are staying. So we now have all of the insurance documents apart from one provider, which we are chasing. And if it comes to it, we won't use that provider. We have a dynamic purchasing system, so we'll put that route back out to tender.
Okay. But I think just the insurance we need is, at the minute, people taking our children to and from school are safe. They've provided all the information needed and there's no problems at all. Is that correct?
Yep, at the minute, from an operator's perspective and a passenger assistant's perspective and a driver's perspective, we have all of the relevant information we need to give surety that those children are being transported to and from school by people who have the relevant security checks and insurances.
Thank you. Judith?
Earlier on you said that the licence plates provide a guarantee. Is it not possible, and indeed most taxi firms do swap personnel around, and that we wouldn't therefore on some days have somebody who had the enhanced DBS or even possibly the DBS check?
So with the audit, the recommendation was that we carried out reconciliations. The audit said on an annual basis, we're prepared to do it on a termly basis. While the taxi companies are not contractually obliged at the moment to provide us with that information, nor do they have it in a format that we could feed into an electronic system, they will provide us with driver lists, which we then cross-reference against the PCC licensing database or the Hampshire County Council licensing database, because obviously a lot of them come from outside of our boundaries. And those drivers then, if they do not appear on those lists, then obviously they would not be able to be used, and we would inform the companies of that.
I'm confused. I thought that it was the licensing plate that was being tested, and the driver can change, I think, can't they? Or am I wrong?
Yeah, so a driver, in order to obtain a licence, has to present the DBS check. The plate is related to the vehicle, and you can have multiple drivers on the vehicle. Yeah. So that's where the reconciliation for the drivers lists and the PCC licensing database backs up that.
Chair, I'd just like to, I think we should move into the 21st century and have a much more dynamic monitoring system to make sure that there aren't drivers coming in and driving under a generic licensing plate that may well have been passed in a generic sense, so that it's easy for drivers to register on the journey. They've got electronic controls, most of them. I think it sounds like an accident waiting to happen.
Education obviously controlled the budget, and we run the operational service on behalf of them. So we can certainly go back to them with suggestions of how it can become more dynamic. And there are obviously route planning and databases that can be used. Currently, myself and James are both aware that the system that we use is quite labour intensive, and that it is reliant a lot on human work in order to make sure those checks are made. So we would have to make the recommendation that we work with education in order to come up with a system that is more 21st century, as you say.
And when a driver signs into a taxi, they sign in with their own ID number. It's easy for them to be able to monitor that. And the last thing we want is some kind of very long-winded inquiry if there's a complaint that is upheld. And you talked about complaints that hadn't been upheld here, which is worrying, actually. The complaints that had been withdrawn, you said earlier, which is quite worrying. We do require the firms to do the check themselves as part of their contract and make sure that Joe Bloggs, who isn't safe, doesn't jump into the cab and drive the service instead of somebody who should have been there. If we had a disaster happening and some child was attacked or there was a suspected attack, that sounds to me like your system wouldn't be much help to a court of law, and we'd all be looking very, very silly.
The system is the best that we can do within the budget that we have. In order to do that, as you've said, would require an entire contract retender, because it doesn't. The only contractual power that we have is that it has to be a safe and expeditious journey. That's all it says in the contract. So in order for us to be able to, so this is the problems that we're coming up against in order to try and get hold of the data. If we want to be able to drill down to the individual driver to ensure that it's DBS checked, then we will have to change the terms and conditions of the contract, which is why then I go back to saying we need to work with our colleagues in education, because it's their budget, therefore obviously we need to work with them to change the contract. As it stands at the moment, all of the checks and safeguards that we have in place are what we can do with the information that the taxi companies are contractually obliged to give us, and with the staff that we have, and we do the reconciliations as often as possible.
I mean, that won't stand up in a court of law if a child is molested. It's going to. I do think we need to go back to making use of the electronic information systems that these taxi firms surely have. Certainly, most of them do, and we need to contract with one that can do that to make sure it's an absolutely watertight system. That kind of thing, if you said that in a court of law, would have us all having to resign. It'd be disastrous.
Can I say this is not a court of law? Okay. I don't want to get overcomplicated in this. Our concern was whether whether checks had been made and the proper insurance is done, right? Yeah. Tristan wants to come into his viewpoint, and then I'd like to sum this up.
Just a quick note to say that we share a lot of your concerns, and what we have here is a situation where we're managing an old contract in a very manual fashion to the best of officers' ability, with a group of providers who are potentially quite reticent to actually share a lot of the information. We are working with Children's Services. We're having a look at a sort of a root and branch review of how we do this. Who's actually on the home to school list? Should they be travelling? Are there better ways of providing a service? And then ultimately, I imagine off the back of that, we'll probably be looking at a re-procurement. But there's an immediate response to it, which is giving you assurance now as much as we can, and it's a limited assurance because they are based on manual checks and information that we're pulling in as quickly as possible. Judith, we totally get that there's a risk, and we're doing everything. And I think something that what Mike was trying to draw to was the point that there hasn't been anything yet, but that's not necessarily good enough. But he is trying. We do have those second layers of assurance in terms of the passenger assistance with those who are probably most vulnerable. And hopefully, at some point, once we've carried out that root and branch, we can come back here and give you some assurances, some further assurances about how the service will improve over time.
Thank you, Tristan. Terry?
Yes, thank you. Just to shadow Councillor Smyth's comments there, really. In this day and age, I mean, with companies such as Uber who do track the drivers for every single journey, let's not forget that these do get a good deal out of this. It's a guaranteed fare twice a day, often during rush hour. I think the absolute minimum is that we know who is behind the wheel of these cars at all times, that they've been checked and the cars are safe. I think the comments there really are if contracts are being looked at sooner rather than later, because this would be dreadful if we were to deal with a situation led to a court case with an outdated system.
Yeah, you're right. I think we've covered that. I just want to be sure, as I sum up, that I've got, and what I've written down is this. I think I came from you, Michelle. Right, yeah. We sought different assurances, and I've written down that we've now been assured as a committee that 100% DBS checks have been made, and we're talking about home to school transport, obviously. I'm not talking about anything else, and that everyone is under the PCC's fleet insurance. Is that correct?
Not quite. So, sorry. So we have checked everybody that has a valid DBS check, that everybody has a valid DBS check. And the problem with DBS checks is there's no actual statutory date where they have to have where you have to reapply for one. So you could have a DBS check and then go out and commit something the following day, but still have a clear DBS check. So we've undertaken that we will check DBS checks at least every 3 years because it now can be an online system. So there is that additional layer of security there, which is not legislation, but obviously we will do that. And Hampshire do that as well, so we're in line with them. So all of the passenger assistants, all of the minibus drivers, all of the operators, and all of the taxi drivers have an enhanced DBS check. With the insurances, it's down to the individual operator. So if you are a driver for an operator, they as your employer have provided us with employer's liability insurance and public liability insurance. If you drive under licence, as a lot of taxi drivers do, so you are self-employed but driving under licence for Aqua or Uber or, Citywide or any of the other local taxi companies, you are responsible for presenting your own public liability insurance when you get your licence and taxi plate. So that's where there is obviously some difference between the two different systems, and where we take the taxi plate as the fact that they have presented their documents to licensing. We've already met with licensing and we can have access to their database, so we can pull down any data that we need, and they will provide us with a monthly report of people who have dropped off the list of their licensing database and been added to the list of their licensing database.
Yeah, I'm going to read out, Liz, I'll want your comment in a minute. I'm going to read out what we were given on the 26th July in relation to insurance, home to school transport, and this is from internal audit. Testing sought to establish that third-party operators had provided evidence to show that they have had the required types and levels of insurance at all times, whilst providing transport services for the council. In addition, testing sought to establish that drivers operating for PCC had met the required conditions to be covered under PCC's fleet insurance. Can somebody give us an assurance that that's fine?
So that particular sentence relates to our minibus drivers. So we have 16 minibuses and about 25 drivers, and yes, they are all covered under PCC insurance.
Liz, any comments from internal audit?
We have undertaken a follow-up review. We have got the report in draft at present. We do not have all evidence, so we have not concluded our piece of work. So at present, I would like to see all evidence that gives you the assurance, and in which case internal audit can then take it off the table. But at the moment, there are some pockets that are outstanding.
Okay, well, I think we'll have to leave it at that. I mean, I think we're on this. We all want the same end at the end of the day, to make sure our children are safe. So, would that be available for the next meeting, Liz?
I think it's positive if there has been good movement. We would like to see the evidence that supports that.
Well, I think our next meeting is November. All right? I think. There's no dates on this, right? And I'd like an assurance at the next meeting that everything is kosher. Okay, so hopefully you'll have looked at the evidence, given it whatever you need to do, and do that, yeah? Is that okay? Judith, you're hogging it.
Well, I'm just now about children's safeguarding, and I have been involved in helping people through serious case reviews. Of course, the DBS is not the main reassurance that we need. The main reassurance we need is we've got another adult who is also DBS knowledgeable and confident enough to be able to blow the whistle should anything happen. We need that for two reasons. One is to stop children coming from harm on their journey home, where they are vulnerable, and second of all, to protect our staff against parents and children who may not be able to communicate very well, and or who may have put in complaints and have difficulties in pursuing those. I'm not satisfied. I'm leaving this committee not satisfied that all those children are entirely safe. And I will almost certainly follow this up with an email to Alison, Tristan, Leo, and just to say that I'm not satisfied, because if anybody's ever been involved in a serious case review, they go into exactly this sort of detail, and at the moment I'm not satisfied we could defend it.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Judith. We can't suspend the service. I mean, it's going to continue with its various parts, and I just hope that when we get to the next meeting that the internal audit particularly will be satisfied that everything is as it should be. Thank you for that. Okay. Anybody report that you can leave now if they so wish. Page 8 then. There's a bit at the bottom of in caps about the Constitution. The Constitution is currently being updated, I suppose is the word, Peter. Is that right? Updated or rewritten, or what's happening to it?
Various bits are being updated.
How many years have we been told that? But you're now in the chair, Peter, and it'll all happen.
I couldn't possibly say.
Anyway, it's been updated, and I hope to come to, and any, of course, constitutional changes would go to full council anyway in due course, okay? Anything else on page? Judith, please.
We had a deputation again from Jerry Brown here about a need to publish a list of senior officers with salaries over 50,000 and the accountability. Was that taken forward in any way? In which case, if so, could we just hear yes or no? And second of all, we could, if the minutes could say what we agreed as a result of the deputation, rather than just leaving it hanging in the future.
Do you know, Peter, as I recall from previous conversations, there was a limit over which you reported, at very senior officer level and not below that. Is that correct?
Yes, 100,000.
Yeah. So there's no requirement to do that, is there?
No. It's 50. It's 50. And I think
okay.
You know, if you remember when we had full council last time, there was a full report from our auditors and accountants which had everybody's salary printed in it, from 50,000 upwards, up to the chief executive head of paid service, including all the monuments and additional elements. So if Jerry looks at that, he'll find it, rather than actually asking us to tell him again. So it's actually in the public domain. Yeah.
That's not statutory requirement, though. That may be what we've chosen to do.
We've
but
chosen
statutory
to do
requirement
that.
is 100.
Yeah. We've been much more transparent about it than you might think.
That's great. I mean, we'd have avoided this conversation if the minute had said it is now being referred to so-and-so, or we're going to do it, or something. I wasn. Sure myself. Thank you.
What you're saying is done, but not necessarily to this committee. It's in the public arena. Okay. Anything else on page 8? Page 9.
33, Annual Statement of Accounts. I would like to inform you that Julian Pike did send a thorough response to my questions, and whilst I did not assuage all my concerns, I would like to thank him for the response which he made. In the next paragraph down, paragraph 3 of 33, reporting of due diligence from Hampshire Community Bank. I thought we were looking at reporting of due diligence concerning the Hampshire Community Bank. Correct.
We will come back at some stage on that one. Okay? So it was due diligence concerning Hampshire Community Bank. Okay? Anything else? Page 10. Okay, page 11. Page 12. On page 13. The report, the very last line of that, the report was noted, members requested to be sent the more recent June minutes of the Strategic Contract Management Board, confidential as they are. That's been done. I have a copy of those. Okay, members. Thank you. Can we agree those as a true record without one amendment? Okay, thank you. Right. And I'm going to move on to the overview, item 4, the overview of Portsmouth City Council complaints.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the report is to bring to the attention of the committee the annual report from the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman, which gives us information about the number of complaints that have been processed through the Ombudsman service. And we also take the opportunity to provide the committee with some information generally about corporate complaints. In relation to the kind of recentness of the data, because we provide information relating to the timeline of the local government ombudsman, the data's from 2018-19, so where appropriate I'll try and give you a bit more recent context, because we've been doing a lot of work to try and improve how we process and manage corporate complaints. Just in general, I think it's important to say that obviously it'd be preferable if every council service was perfect, but we don't always get things right, and we do welcome complaints from the public, and I think the whole idea around the corporate complaints process is we try and make that as easy as possible for people to complain to us if they have a problem, so we can put it right. So just in terms of some headlines, there's been a slight reduction in the number of complaints managed through the system, but it's very slight, a reduction of 10. In terms of stage 1 complaints, we're managing 66% in line with the timelines set out in the corporate complaints policy. That's about the same as it was the previous year. It's an area where we've definitely got room for improvement. What I would say though in relation to the data around the timelines for stage 1 complaints is that it's a 10 working day turnaround, which can sometimes be challenging for officers to manage when that's the amount of time you've got to assimilate the information about the complaint, process that into a response and get that out to the customer. So sometimes that timeline can be challenging. Also, in terms of an average, actually our average is only just over 10 days, so it's 10.56 days. So in most cases, we're only just missing that timeline. And where we do miss it, we make sure if we're going to not achieve the timescales, we always let the customers know. In terms of the way that we've made improvements around complaints, what we've tried to do is to look more carefully at the quality of the complaint responses at stage 1, so that the customer's complaint gets answered in the first time that they get in contact. And what we've seen as a result of that is a reduction in the number of complaints that are therefore escalated to stage 2 and stage 3, because by making sure that we're actually addressing every single aspect of the complaint at stage 1 means fewer complaints need to be escalated through the process. So that's why we're seeing a reduction in the number of complaints going through to stage 2 and stage 3. We're also seeing some improvements in the timescales around stage 2 and stage 3 complaints. So in the previous year, we were only at sort of 56% of complaints being managed in the timeline. We've reduced it from only from 23% to 56% being managed within the timelines. And just for some context from this year, so far this year, 100% of our stage 2s have been done within the timeline. So we really are working hard to try and improve that. There's absolutely still room for improvement, and in terms of some of the changes that we've made, we have a new IT system around corporate complaints which we implemented in August, so that will provide us with automated responses and help us to get those timescales up even more. The report also includes some information about adults and children's social care complaints. Those are managed in line with a different process, but we've included the information in there for completeness. You can see the number of adults complaints is reduced actually quite significantly. The number of children's complaints is relatively static. I'm sure if the committee wanted more information about those, the complaints team for that area would be happy to come and talk about that. And then moving on to the local government and social care ombudsman complaints, so the number is relatively static. It compares favourably to councils of relatively similar size. The number of complaints that have been upheld has also remained relatively static since 16-17. Of the 8 complaints that were upheld, those were remedied following advice from the Ombudsman, although 1 had been remedied to their satisfaction before that advice was provided. And in terms of actions taken, the Council did a number of things in relation to those kind of complaints. So reviewing services provided by external suppliers, looking at policies and making changes to policies and processes, reminding staff of the correct processes to follow, etc., etc. So wherever there is an LGO complaint that's upheld, we're learning from that and making those improvements. So just overall, I think the management of complaints is improving. It's something we're working hard to improve, and our new IT system should help us to improve the timeline adherence even further. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions, any members? John, please.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly the report is marked as an overview, and that's what it is, so it does give us some data, and it's interesting to see how we compare with other local authorities. However, I think it would be useful for this committee to have more information to those cases that go to the local government ombudsman. Now, there is a case that I can recognise amongst these. Peter will know that it's been ongoing for some particular time. I think there's been certainly elements of it which were not dealt with well by the council, and we need to learn from that. I just wonder if we could have more information on orange papers that accompany this report in the future, so that we're able to look at the detail. How did those cases get to the local government ombudsman? You know, what did the council do, or how did the council fail to redress an earlier opportunity? And clearly there are cases where the local government ombudsman will make comment about the council and the way it's conducted itself. And I think as this committee, because I know that the case that I'm talking about, I've seen elements of it come here to the committee where things have happened that have gone wrong, and we've been able to look at that. But I think it would be helpful if we saw those cases, let's say, in terms of their totality, how they got there, what the council did, where the ombudsman believes the council went wrong, and I think that would be helpful for us then, making sure that the council are addressing those failings that have been identified.
Well, thank you, John. I agree with that. That's not a problem.
No, that wouldn't be a problem, and a certain amount of the detail of the upheld cases is published by the Ombudsman anyway, but we could look at how much additional information you'd like to see, and then I guess take a judgment as to whether or not that needs to come on orange paper or not, as to whether or not we'd be identifying the complainants, because we clearly wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
On the same lines as Councillor Ferret, I think it would be useful for us just to know in a single line whether or not there were a heavy concentration of complaints in one particular area of one of these sections work, or whether it was all different. I think it's very significant if you end up with a lot of complaints on the same thing, and that's when we might need to ask further questions. I don't want much detail there, but we do need to know if there are particular areas that we're failing in badly in relation to others.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Yes, just for information on 5.6. In one case, the council had already provided a satisfactory remedy before the case was referred. How come that the case was then referred? Is there not some inefficiency here?
I think the referral of the complaint to the Ombudsman is something that the complainant does. So the council may have already remedied the complaint, but the complainant isn't satisfied with that and still takes that to the Ombudsman, but then the Ombudsman advises that complainant that they uphold the complaint, but the council has already done what it would have recommended is done, if that makes sense.
Yes. Is that the case? Is that the situation in this case?
I don't know. I would have to go and find that out.
Okay. Could I adjust my point on complaints? I don't personally have any problem with a large number of complaints. Clearly, if it was over the top, there'd be concerns, because I think it's right that within a democracy, people can complain, and we in fact tell them the process they can get through, particularly up to the Ombudsman. Things are improving. I think the important thing is learning from these, and I think that's a good point that John's made in relation to how possibly could we have avoided one or two going to the local government ombudsman if we get that more detail. It'll be a year from now, I think, will it? Is it once a year you report?
We bring this report to you once a year when the Ombudsman provides the report, but there isn't any reason why we couldn't retrospectively provide more information about these upheld complaints, if that would be helpful to the committee.
That would be very helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, member. I know this is only for information, but I think it's important that we've gone through it right. Item 5 then, Ian's here, dealing with review of polling districts. Ian, I'm not sure. It just does this go on to full council?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Okay. Well, the floor is yours, Ian.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the review is to determine the suitability of current arrangements and make any necessary amendments. Consultation was undertaken, and as part of that, the returning officer made some proposals as a statutory respondent. These are summarised page 29, page 30 of the papers. They included some polling district amendments in Eastern Cranes Water Ward, around the Canoe Lake area, fairly modest amendment, and also Paulsgrove Ward in the Southampton Road area. Additional proposals were made for Hilsey Ward, which, following representation from Councillor Peter Harris, were not taken forward. This is because of issues at Northern Parade School. There were some building works which meant that temporarily we were unable to use the facility. On completion of those works, we were unable to return. So that prompted the proposals we made. Further conversations and a change, I believe, in the person responsible for the person certainly that we have contact with changed, and now it is available. So therefore, we're not taking those proposals forward in the recommendations. Beyond that, the second representation received, the second part of Councillor Peter Harris's representation regarding Hilsey Ward suggested the use of the Phoenix Public House, which again we're taking forward within the report recommendations as a temporary polling place amendment, whilst St Nicholas Church Hall is also being renovated. Otherwise, there was only a second representation, which was from Councillor Tom Wood, Chatham Drive, small amendment there, set out on page 31, which was also included as a recommendation, along with a number of other small polling place amendments, largely due to availability of venues changing over the last year or two. One small amendment to the recommendations, which has been circulated here, which is some very late information that's come through, unfortunately, is that Oasis Church and Conference Centre, which was initially proposed as a change of venue for polling district GC, is now no longer available. So we are going with the suggested backup alternative, which is St Faith's Church, who have indicated that they're happy to accommodate 2 polling stations within the building there. That was what I had to say on the recommendations. Perhaps should I also just address the deputation at this point? Okay, so I'm familiar with the Porter Cabin sites up at Paulsgrove and also Fairfield Square. So I actually went up there myself during the May elections, which is very, very helpful. And totally recognise that Porter Cabins are not ideal polling station venues. They're only used where we absolutely need to, where there's no other suitable alternative. The recommendations though made following this review are concerned with the actual designation of polling districts and polling places. So although the points raised therefore fall outside of the scope of that, of the recommendations, we'll undertake to investigate what other options, or what options we can take forward to improve the general facilities up at the Porter Cabin sites.
Ian, so in respect to this, and to be fair to you, you've been twice to meetings, not to the pre-meetings telling us that this was going to happen. You only had 2 written deputations, representations, plus 1 verbal that we had this afternoon. How widespread was the consultation?
It's on the website, Council's website. It was circulated to members. The Qualities Impact Assessment identifies some other groups that we consulted with as well, including the Portsmouth Disability Forum, Age Concern, and a number of other PCC departments as well, which I could check to see what those are. Off the top of my head, I don't recall. My colleague was actually... So, the Independence and Wellbeing Team, Integrated Learning Disability Services, and the Shared Lives teams. I was also in the libraries as well. It's actually not, I think the previous review also didn't have a lot of representations either.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or points, members? Donna, please.
So I can confirm that the KA and KB are back to where they originally were?
As they were, yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks.
The election before last, I received a number of complaints about the wheelchair access into the Salvation Army, which we did report, and I probably should have followed it up with you. I certainly sent you an email. What's the process for dealing with that sort of thing on election day and thereafter to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Okay, so I do recall the particular instance we had there. That was, we used a particular room within the Salvation Army, and a temporary ramp had to be put outside, which at the time I believe there were also some building work, some scaffolding, which really didn't help access at that particular time. We've since negotiated with the Salvation Army, and we now use a different room within the building, which doesn't have there's no need for a temporary ramp, it's step-free. So I believe that's been resolved.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, we had a deputation from Jerry Brown. I would share some of the concerns he has about that area. It's a very small polling district, 600, and I think I can remember years where it's been raining and only a handful of people have used that, and it is, it's open to the elements, let's say, in terms of getting there, and not much in the way of shelter if you were waiting to go in. I just ask Ian, has any consideration been given to having that polling station at Hillside and Wimmering, which is just round the corner, but I do take the point that you wouldn't further want to reduce the turnout that you have in that area. I just wonder if that has been considered. If not, then I think Jerry made some really good points about how we could improve that polling station, maybe by increasing the size of the portal cabin that's used.
In answer to those questions, yes, we did a number of years ago consider merging it with the Hillside site. In the interim period, there were building works there, as that was being rebuilt as well. I think generally we would prefer to keep a separate station for that exact reason, that having people walk down the hill exactly. So we'd rather keep that as a separate polling district. I think the points about maybe looking at a larger portal cabin and some other sort of maybe hope and comforts that we can provide would be welcome for the staff up there. That said, having visited the staff up there, they request to be at that particular location, and I know they've made some good contacts with the local residents as well, which is encouraging.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Just so members were asked to, there's two recommendations there. Recommendation 1, changes to the current scheme in 5.2 to 5.10 are approved and implemented on publication of the 2020 register. And 2, that is to reconfirm that the returning officer has delegated authority to make such variations to polling places as may be necessary arising from the availability of premises for use at a particular election. Is that agreed, members?
Chair, just with that amendment in F, the one that Ian circulated.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
I missed, yeah.
That's okay.
Right. Yeah. Without amendment.
It's just to be clear, it's the amended designated, the list here that was circulated.
Yeah. Is that fine, members? Is that okay? Thank you. I don't think I'm looking forward to this council meeting. Because people who hadn't thought of anything before would suddenly think of that. I remember one, was it the last one or the one before that, Donna, where people were up and down forever. It lasted for about 2 hours, the debate on that. But hopefully people will fall asleep when this one's called. Thank you. Members, can we move on to item 7, please?
Okay, so this is to discuss some amendments to the CPRs, and then I'll also talk about, after I've spoken about the specific changes, some wider reviews that are happening in the CPRs as well that were discussed at briefing. Okay. The CPRs are a statutory duty. They're the contract procedure rules, and they're standing guides to how you commission contracts. They were last updated in January 2016. The Strategic Contract Management Board, which is another governance board for the council's spend, agreed that it would be good practice to bring in a inflationary cost price increase control mechanism. So what we have essentially before us here today is to agree an amendment to the CPRs so that we can govern controls. Obviously, there's a lot of changes in the value of sterling that might drive increases, and equally there's just general inflation costs as well. So it's important for cost avoidance if we can make a central governance over this. And this replicates best practice that I certainly was used to when I worked in private sector. So there's been some amendments to the table under point 4.17. So the proposal is that up to CPI inflation, cost price increases could be approved by the third tier manager. But if the proposed cost price increase was above CPI by no more than 2%, it could be approved by the director. And that's for all contracts, whether they are transactional, operational or strategic. Quickly just defining those, a strategic contract is a contract that lasts more than 4 years or is worth more than £4 million. A transactional contract is a contract that lasts less than 18 months or is worth less than £1 million, and an operational contract of those in between. And as the procurement manager, I have the right to maybe say that an operational contract that lasts for 10 years is strategic because it's lasting so long. Yeah. So on all operational contracts, if the increase is above CPI, above 2% but less than 10%, then the relevant service can present their case to me as to how they've tried to negotiate out that price increase and as to why they think it's valid. At that stage, several things might occur. I might assist them with some negotiations to try and offset that. And then at the end of that, if I felt that it was approvable and justified, then we'd agree to that increase. Obviously, there would be, by that stage, you will have had potentially 4 officers try to negotiate out that increase, which is a good behaviour for the organisation. And then there's a gap that I've spotted in here that I suggest we agree as well, which is that if it's an operational contract and for some reason we can't negotiate the cost price increase down to less than 10%, that it goes to the Strategic Contract Management Board. So that could be, for example, where there is a big fluctuation in the valuation of currency exchanges. There was a situation where some of the IT vendors, actually announced 20% price increases. So it's rare, but it can happen, but I think it's right that there's oversight at that level. Then this is the main area, and this is the key area. So these are the strategic contracts. These are contracts worth more than £4 million. These contracts, if you talk about whole lifetime spend that we've committed to, these contracts themselves probably account for over 90% of the total spend that the council has committed to. So these are the ones to really defend against any cost price increases. And the suggestion is that above CPI, up to 2%, obviously could be approved by a director. Above 2%, but less than 5% by myself as the procurement manager. Anything else above 5% would need to go to the Strategic Contract Management Board, because obviously a price increase of 5% on a contract that's worth 25 million a year, it adds up. That in essence is the reason to bring this forward as the amendment for this particular round. But what I would say is that myself and my procurement managers and all of the colleagues of the council's contracting side also had a whole day where we reviewed the council's contract procedure rules, and they will be coming forward en masse for a general revision update which will be presented to Cabinet, and that will include things like all the GDPR regulation changes and a few kind of statutory changes. We did discuss at that away day, because there had been some discussions in the members' briefing about the consultant clause, which is on page 69 of your packs, item 19, and we have discussed at length with our colleagues in legal to discuss about declaration of interests and make sure that that's considered in that when it comes forward with the full wash-up. That's all. I can answer any questions if people would like me to.
Yeah, I'd raise that point at the briefing, if you remember, because my concern is the revolving doors. We see it mainly with top civil servants suddenly going out to do defence procurement or whatever, and I think it was within 2 years you weren't supposed to do it, but somebody decides that it's okay to do. And I was just, I was concerned, and I know you said it's raised in the web there, but I was concerned that there weren't enough checks and balances in this. That, the hand is put on the shoulder of somebody, we'd be all right, we'll call you back as a consultant or whatever. I'd be interested in your views on that, and whether the system we got in operation works, and also Peter's view in his early days yet, because any dispute will go to the City Solicitor's Department, won't it?
Well, I think to come back on the point that I took to the day where we reviewed everything, the declaration of interest, I think that was actually met by all of the people from procurement and legal and seen as a good idea. Yeah, that's incorporated into the CPRs, because I think then if the consultant has been brought in from another council and may have been involved in a similar kind of sphere of things before that can be declared, or if they have anything like that's of a concern. I think that these historically have been drafted to include the reference to the Director of Human Resources, specifically to track people who leave and come back in. So I think that was the reason why that's there, to try and deal with that rehiring of people who've left. Of course, there has been a reorganisation, so when that is amended, that will be, I believe, the Director of Resources who has responsibility for HR moving forward. So I think that's the check for people leaving being re-engaged, and then I think the declaration of interest adds the further weight to that. But happy to take any further comments.
Just to say in the past, sorry, I'll call you on it, just in the past that I've been at meetings where there had been no declaration of interest, and then some years later I found out that Joe or Jane blogs actually should have declared an interest. So I'm not sure that's a fail-safe, and I'm not sure that people actually understand, or do you think they do, because they're not civil servants, because they're not councillors, but do people actually understand what the declaration of interest means? And then in that case, what would you do? Peter, sorry.
I think it's part of the inherent pre-engagement with the consultant bit that you ask that very simple question that you would interview as a standard question: have you been or ever been an employee of this organisation within the last 6 months? Answer yes or no. At which point they say yes, at which point you make a sort of sensible judgment about employing that person as a consultant. What you're worried about, Leo, is popping up 6 months later when they've got the gig and they're doing the job, and you are worried about the sort of veracity or the cost of employing them at that point, aren't you? So you should ask them at the beginning of the process.
Yeah, sorry, there is that, but there's also the fact that somebody might be told to leave or whatever, but it's all right, mate, wink, wink, we'll take you back as a consultant. That would be a concern I have. I'm sure it's just probably been suspicious about it. I'm sure it doesn't happen. But I'd be concerned. I just want to know then. I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure, Greg, whether it makes any difference whether it's head of resources or head of whatever that decides on that.
I think it's an interesting thing, because I remember at the briefing there were some examples given, and so I think absolutely these should be redrafted to provide the comfort to councillors. Absolutely. I think also there was a situation where. I think Head of Audit raised about a previous Head of Audit who had specific decades of training and knowledge, being a proportionate response to have that flexibility, even though they may have worked for us before.
But I think the other point that was raised is just having a little bit of protection and clarity around not only when it is an ex-employee, but when it is a close friend or relation. So it kind of needs to be just extended, so that the question that is asked if you come for a job would be, have you got anything to declare in relation to any key relationships? Because those key relationships might influence or might get you into trouble a little bit further on down the line where we don't appear to have been that transparent. But in actual fact, if we had put it on the table, it was all bona fide and above board, and we would have still gone down the same path. So, how happy would you be if I appointed a close friend and relative to do a piece of work? They're not an ex-employee, but am I being biased when I've selected that individual.
I mean, that's a fair point which I hadn't thought about, but the transparency's got to be there, hasn't it? Okay, so how do you build that in then? You make sure that that person declares that I'm the son, daughter of, or uncle or aunt of the Chief Internal Officer. Is that what you would say?
And I think the assessment that should be made is if it was me appointing, I'd come out of the equation. I couldn't do the appointment if one of the candidates was that close to the equation. So yeah, you can have those controls around it. It's helpful when you can pull upon Greg and Greg's team because they are not sufficiently close enough to the individual activities that necessarily that they could have that direct contact. So yeah, it's about where you escalate it to and how clear you are when you...
I'm conscious that there's other members wanting to raise points. I'll just make one point very quickly, which is, of course, in considering this clause, you need to consider that heads of directors can actually make an appointment up to £100,000 in their own kind of view. So you might want to consider a check and balance in that area as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sure that this has just come over from the last report, I presume. I presume this has been in play. It's just I picked it up this time and not the last time. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that the revision to the CPR rules for CPI is really sensible because it will speed things up and take away lots of the bureaucracy and slowing things down, which then often adds in more costs. However, a lot of our contracts, the big ones and the historic ones, I'm assuming, were written on RPI increases. So I'm assuming then, and just for clarity, that even though a manager, director, the SCMB team have the ability to revise contracts up on a CPI plus 2 plus up to 5, 10, whatever. But you're an expert in that and you get the difference between RPI and CPI, and so do you, and so do you, and so do I. But there will be people that work for us that really don't understand. So we need to make sure that they're trained, that they don't start talking about CPI furthermore with contractors, which then gives the contractor a claim to be able to say, well, hang on a minute, for the last 3 or 4 years, your blah blah manager's been talking about CPI, because this is only for us to sign off cost increase, isn't it? We want the original contracts that are on RPI to stay on RPI because it's less than CPI. Do you get me?
Yeah. So I think, trying to choose my words delicately, we would look to ensure the most economically advantageous outcome for the council.
Well, that's our duty, isn't it?
Yeah.
Judith?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not clear, and this is a question, I may not have seen it here, but I think I have looked. You mentioned under the best way to deal with this is under page 60, you mentioned the social value duty, the Public Services Act. I don't see any further reference to the conditions of that in the subsequent document. And my particular concern here, which is something I'm just trying to explore, is how we're going to get a requirement, probably in the pre-contract documents, of everybody that we contract with to participate in the reduction of carbon across the city, which is perfectly allowable under any rules and so on and so forth, would need to be judged in the context of cost on a case-by-case basis. But we should be now requiring, alongside the raft of other legal things and things in the Social Value Act, that everybody is contributing to the reduction of the carbon footprint in Portsmouth in any new contract that we have. And I don't see it in here. And I don't know whether I should see it in here. But
Okay, well, I try and answer that with a kind of logical response in terms of the way I introduced this paper. I introduced this paper with this is just a one change to do with the cost control mechanism, and that there is a wider review going on. So we can pick up those points in the wider review. In relation to the Social Value Act, the Council does perform quite well in securing social value, but the Social Value Act duty places a duty on the Commissioner to consider social value. So there is a difference between procurement and the commission. And the commission, I fully know that you know this, I'm just for the benefit of everyone else. The commissioner could either be someone in social care, or equally it could be an engineer in an engineering department, and it's that they consider how you do that. Then the role of procurement is then to help them secure the service model and actually, if you like, the most social value that they can. But it's how that person considers that. What we do through our gateway process is prompt them to consider that and suggest to them that perhaps maybe they could get more than they're aiming for, and various things like that. But the responsibility is not via the contract procedure rules. It's actually the duties placed on the person who is commissioning the service to consider it. And then I am aware that there are wider pieces of work that I believe the officer Kelly Nash is working on the carbon, and we will work into that project.
I do know that some people, some local authorities interpret the Social Value Act already to allow for environmental clauses, but it is something that if we don't put it in as a baseline requirement, I understand the process you've described, then we're not going to achieve our zero carbon ambitions. So at some stage it'd be good to have a conversation about that. Yeah.
More than happy to.
Thank you.
Okay, members, any other points or questions? Well, the recommendation, which is... Liz, go on.
Sorry, Greg, I wanted to ask, you know the corporate tax evasion legislation that's come in?
Right.
Will that come into here as well? Because there are synergies with the bribery, but I don't know how it impacts upon this.
So there's a general provision, bear with me 2 seconds and I'll try and get the part in the report. Yes, in section 4.2 you'll see standard review of the CPR. So this is that wider review. Yeah, and in that wider review there, 4.2.2, it talks about legislative updates that have occurred since 2016, like GDP, over onto page 56, GDPR and the Armed Forces Covenant, revised insurance. So we can raise that point there. So you said it was tax.
Is corporate tax evasion?
Okay, we can certainly make sure that with myself, my team and my colleagues in legal, we consider that and get that drafted in.
Just to be clear, this report going forward is essentially to deal with the CPIs, isn't it? It's a wider bit of work you're talking about in terms of tax and or general review after your away day, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
But just also to be clear, that the comments you've made about safeguards, about use of consultants, close family, is this
It's a wider issue.
Yeah, but it's dealt with in para 19.
No, they're the existing CPI. They're the existing contract rules. They exist now.
But
they're not going to change.
So you're not looking to change those?
Not this week, are you?
No, so yeah, just to really, I'll try and make this super clear and super simple. This has come along for one thing, which is the cost price increase control.
Which is the recommendation.
Because I think we all recognise that there could be some improvements to be made. There is a working group, shall we call it that?
Yeah.
That is working on the wider improvements and will report back covering the points that have been raised today.
So just for my own clarity, of course, if this is going on to full council chair, at the moment, you know, all everything there that's in front that talks about para 19, use of consultants, no ex-employee, that will still be in front of full council if it goes as is. Is that the will of you? That's fine. Okay, because obviously members might start trying to alter it at full council. That was all.
I think they're entitled to it as they want to. It's a bit of a strange recommendation, isn't it? Because I didn't know we had the power to stop it going to full council, but it says that we consider whether to recommend it. I think it's got to go to full council. I understand that this thing goes to full council, so it's not really considering it. It's noting that it will note the report and note that it goes to a future council meeting. I presume that's the 1 or 2 weeks' time. Is it the 15th?
I'm not sure it will be the 1 and 2 weeks' time. I'll pick up with my colleagues in
It doesn't matter.
legal.
Doesn't matter.
But yeah, I think Echo, I can see where you're coming from, and I think it's probably, maybe we could look at it as like a form of consultation before it goes that way. Okay.
What do you mean?
Well, what we've managed to do in this process at Gas is to get quite a few ideas, so that when it is presented, it will, hopefully, the consultations that we've had will make it better at Cabinet.
Well, that's fine. But the recommendation will then is that it will go to full council at some stage.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Will it come back here first?
If you'd like me to.
I wouldn't want to hold things up. That's all.
I think for the initial amendment, which is the defending the price increase, I think it appears to me that everybody's in agreement with that. I think for the wider one, which is the one where lots of things like tax and declarations of interest and stuff, I think that's probably the one that needs to go back to the council.
Okay, Judith, yeah. What, in your view, Greg, is going to full council? This full report or a bit of this report?
I'm more than happy.
I know you want to clear the main reason for it.
Yeah,
the other bits, I think, even from my perspective, I don't know, were just questions to be looked at some stage.
The main initial reason was Local Government Act economy, efficiency, effectiveness and protecting us against price increases, and I think we should really, with all of our fiduciary duties, just proceed that as soon as we can. The wider review, I think, working with my colleagues in legal, that we bring that back, and I think we would look to bring that to within the next 6 months, covering off the social value, the carbon, the tax, the consultant kind of angles.
I mean, it would be helpful then if that was pointed out to full council, or you might have us all wanting to make a field day of this, which wouldn't be helpful in the public interest, probably.
Sorry, Chair, that was the point I was trying to make. If you're not asking council to actually address some of the issues in the documents before them, is it better to extract the bits that you actually do want them to focus on? Otherwise, you're going to have a debate about things that you're actually...
Well, Stuart, I seek your advice on this, right?
Okay.
If just to amend the contract procedure rules for the price increase part, it doesn't need to go to full council, then, and Gas has the power to approve that, then I think that would be good to move forward on that today. I think I understood from other officers that potentially, even just to do the price increase, it might have to go to council.
I'm not disputing it having to go to full council. What I'm saying is, if you're saying the entirety of the document is not ready to go, it's hard to expect full council to be presented just with the uplifts when you've got other issues in front of them. They're not, unless you put a giant warning saying the other 20 pages please don't address or please ignore, you either extract it and say the problem...
Okay, so I think that's the solution then, Stuart. I think we'll simply do that. I think we'll make it very abundantly clear. It's just this one section, and in 6 months' time the rest will come back.
That could be covered through group leaders as well, so that group leaders can brief their groups ahead of group meetings to say we're just focusing on line 17 of the procurement rules, not all 170 of them or something.
I think, I'll go back to Stuart's point, and I think it'd be easier and better for us, because he's right, we'll get involved in all sorts of discussions, and I'll probably jump up, raising a point, you know what I mean, right, which is totally irrelevant to what you want to achieve on the day. So I think it's just a report saying, these are the recommendations. Right?
I think you're all being wildly optimistic that councillors would read it fully and be that interested to talk about it.
No, we're streamlined. Councillors read everything. Yeah, can I leave it to you to sort out, but you just want to get particular things done at this stage, and then it's ongoing, the report, you're looking at it over the next few months or whatever. So let's get something done for a future meeting of the council in relation to what you want to be done, Greg. So if you can discuss with...
And again, just to help people understand, the ownership of the it's a very interesting thing the way the Constitution works, but the ownership of the contract procedure rules is actually with our colleagues in legal, okay, but procurement and legal work collegiately almost together on it. So the paper will come back in submitted via that way, but I'm welcome to come along and help present it.
I think I'm going to lie down, Greg. I'm getting more and more confused. Donna?
So full council owns the strategy, but the executive implements it with officers. Because I'm just wondering then, if full council owns the strategy and is accountable if there was ever an external investigation of something that was a breach, should SCMB have opposition councillors on it? So at the moment it's only the portfolio holder with director and I assume someone from procurement. I mean, that might be wrong. It might be that it is the executive, is just the right level there. But if you look at the page that talks about the contract, there's a contract procedural document here, Strategic Contract Management Board, and it says on there at the back, terms of reference and membership is portfolio holder to provide guidance as to the Cabinet's likely view of contract performance. So I'm assuming that's to agree a contract uplift.
It's there so that, because some of these contracts that go to the Strategic Contract Management Board are maybe 20 years old or might last for 20 years. Obviously, administrations might change, priorities for the council might change. So the idea was that it's become that it's the deputy leader who attends. But the idea is that they check with their colleagues, portfolio holders, on that particular contract. And equally, if a portfolio holder wants to come along, they could come along. It's an interesting point whether people other than those in the administration should.
I get that. What I'm trying to say is, if the document, a lot of documents are signed off by full council, but then it then goes back to the executive to administer, and in which case, if this is the same with this one, it's entirely appropriate that it's just the executive that sit on the SCMB with relevant directors. But this seems to be a little bit of a grey area with this particular one, because it is a document owned by full council, and this is therefore full council effectively, by agreeing this document, appendix, Strategic Contract Management Board, terms of reference and membership, is therefore delegating to the executive the right to sign off contracts over a certain amount. So I'm wondering whether we should also, as part of Greg's wider review, look at the membership as well, because this seems to me to be something that if we got this wrong in some way, it would be full council that got it wrong and not the executive. And therefore, without any being disrespectful to the Liberal Democrats, I'd quite like to have someone from my team round the table looking to see if what they're doing at SMB, when you've got a 20-year-old really badly written contract, that you've got that conflict between RPI, CPI, you've got some really old misnomers in that contract. If we could potentially be partly to blame if something goes wrong in the future through full council, I think I'd quite like one of mine sat round the table having a pair of eyes and ears on that and to give their take on it. But it might be, it's a bit of a legal one really, it's whether or not you think there is a clear distinction, because if there is a clear enough distinction in local government ombudsman rules and it is really the executive, then it's up to the Lib Dems then if they get it wrong, in which case I don't need anyone there. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. It's always been the executive that deals with it. The Strategic Contract Management Board is essentially a creation of our own for the purposes of looking at old contracts and looking at them as we go along. My view about it is it sits with the incumbent administration, and it is essentially run by Greg and the invitees at that meeting.
Well, if that's the way the administration wish to keep it, which I don't object to at all, can you just make that clear in your review?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to pass the buck at all. It's just I think we need to have it clear.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying, and I get the logic of where it's going, but it's always been worked on the basis that the current administration deals with it, on the basis that the contracts are looking at them at that point in time. Yeah. So if anyone wants to come back and challenge me on that, I'm happy with it, but that's my view today.
There's lots of things in this council that have always been done that way, so we always do them. But I'm talking about the legalities. If something went really badly wrong with a multi-million-pound contract, let's say the PFI, for example, okay? Right, so if something is not great, I just want to know legally, this contract has to come to full council for sign-off, as do other things like children's safeguarding, annual policies, strategies. Yep. There are certain things that we are all responsible for, even if we're not a member of the executive, and can all be prosecuted and held accountable if things are not done correctly. Is this one of them? If it's not, because there is a clear distinction that it's the executive that hold that responsibility, no problem. If, however, it's a bit more of a grey area, and it might be something we need to refer on to the MHCRG and ask them for or get someone to look at the legislation so we can have a look at it. I'm sure we can look at what other councils do, but just because that's what other councils have always done doesn't necessarily mean it's right. And I'm probably picking at holes here in something which is never going to be an issue, but if it's being reviewed by Greg's team, I'm just thinking it might make sense to look at, that as well.
So there's two things. There's the contract procedurals and the Strategic Contract Management Board. So the Strategic Contract Management Board minutes are actually an appendix that comes in the procurement information on a quarterly basis to gas. I don't know if that helps Peter clarify the situation constitutionally in terms of the CPRs. I'm not sure where that sits with the municipal. So what I will do is sit down with Peter, go through the constitution, and then segment it into what the existing administration issues are in relation to the CPRs, and then separately what they are into relation of the SCMB. Personally speaking, I'm more than happy for anybody, to come along, but we'll see where it's at.
Yeah, I'm more than happy there as well, but all the current administration has done is carry on from the previous administration. No, but we're a deputy leader, so I think maybe it'd be a nice initial discussion, maybe at leaders group meeting, whatever the hell they call themselves, and to say that, because I think the more people involved, the better, I have to say. I mean, that's it's not a problem for me, I think it was just, this is who did it previously, so we'll just carry on that same format.
I think there's a good business logic for it, which is if it was by people higher than me approve that decision, then you would have continuity of business decision making, which I think would be a benefit to the supplier and the council.
Judith, yeah.
I mean, it's always good to see Greg here, and this is a really important area of our work, and I don't, as a relatively new councillor, think that we do govern it overall as well as we might. And when I saw this, we've now been told, and it is clear from the minutes, that we're only making a decision about that little table. But there are some other bits of this I'd like to get into, and I think perhaps, Chair, what we might need to do is to arrange a meeting of at least some of us from this committee to go through the proposals that Greg's group is going to bring forward, together with anything that comes from the solicitor and his team and so on, to have a kind of slightly more strategic overall discussion in a cross-party way about it. Because this procurement is such a very important area of our work, and I don't think that as a council I've seen evidence that we've dealt with it as serious as some of the other things. Proportionally, there's millions of pounds going out the door, usually perfectly well spent. But if I'm not satisfied that I know enough about it, and I'm afraid I'm so fascinated in all this subject that I think we need to deal with it another way.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, what we're saying, I think, is that the appendix here, the contract procedure rules, does not need to go to council at the next stage. So that's been reviewed. People will have an input into that if as needs be. And I don't know, and I'll have to ask members whether, in fact, once you've got a bit of groundwork done, Greg, whether it's just having a meeting with just yourself for you to explain what's happening.
Be more than happy to do that. That meeting will be with myself representing procurement, and then, if you like, the constitutional owner that will come along with that is my colleague Sophie Mallon as well, and we pair of us will be more than happy to work with any members and field any queries and try and arrive at an output that everybody is happy with.
Well, what I'll do, we'll put that in a minute, okay, and then we'll see what future meetings of council have to say. But if people want to be involved, and I think it's, having read it, and remember the previous one, there's very little change in it. It's just seeking interpretations of how things could be better, to my mind. Donna, did you want to come back in? No, okay, thank you. Sorry, and then the rules, but we'll be looking at some stage in the future. Okay. I'll lower the current ones per 10. Yeah.
And we're going to make sure we don't forget. To make sure we don't forget the bit about the rules to do with conflict of interest and that.
That's what I'm saying. We've raised the points which will be considered.
And my point about the environmental gains relating to the Social Value Act being must-dos here, and we need to do some more work on that.
I'm sure Anna's noted that, and they'll be in the minutes, so we'll make sure that there's a trail on that.
Thank you.
Greg, thank you. Said in the future, I keep forgetting to turn this thing off and on. So, okay, members, on that one, can we move then to the audit letter, Portsmouth City Council Annual Audit Letter 218-219.
Thank you, Chair. So our paper today is the annual audit letter for 2018-19. It's a code of audit practice requirement to issue an annual audit letter following the issue of the audit opinion for the year. In effect, it's intended to be a public-facing version of the audit results report, the longer document that we presented to your meeting in July. But as such, what it is really doing then is just reiterating the findings which we reported to you at your July meeting. I think it arises historically because it wasn't usually common practice to publish the audit results report at a point in time. So the annual audit letter was the sort of public mechanism for people to understand the outcomes of the audit, but obviously things have moved on slightly since then because most authorities do publish the audit results reports, at least in papers for committees, but nevertheless. So this report is confirming the final outcomes and the opinions given from our 2018-19 audit. So if I go to page 4 per the EY page numbers, or 82 per the pack, that's the executive summary, and it's summarising the outcomes of the audit. So we presented the audit results report to your meeting in the last week of July, and subsequent to that, the audit was completed by the 31st of July deadline. We issued an unqualified opinion on the Council's financial statements and an unmodified value for money conclusion about the Council's arrangements. We were not required to use any of our wider reporting powers. The one aspect of the work which was outstanding at the 31st of July under our wider responsibilities, but which was subject to a separate deadline, so it didn't need to be completed by 31st of July, was the whole of government accounts review. That work was ongoing when I spoke to you at the briefing, but that has subsequently been completed. The submissions went in on time, so the deadline for that was 13th of September. The submissions went in just beforehand. There were no issues arising, and as that was the final aspect of our work for 2018-19, we were then able to issue the audit certificate, which is the formal confirmation of closure of the audit for 18-19. Going on to page 9 per the EY page numbers, or 87 per the pack. This section summarises the outcomes of the work that we undertook in response to the identified significant risks and other areas of higher inherent risk or areas of audit focus. Really, there is nothing to add here to what was reported to you, either in writing or through the verbal update that was provided to your July meeting. There was one audit difference in property, plant and equipment above our reporting threshold, which was adjusted in the final signed version of the accounts, and one which was below a material level within the pensions balance, which was judgmental in nature, which was unadjusted, but that was not unexpected, and that was not any different really from the outcome of a similar piece of work at most other authorities. The only other thing I wanted really to mention was page 22 per the EY page numbers, or 100 per the pack, which is supplementary to what was reported in the audit results report, which is that we are proposing an additional fee of £382 in respect of work that was undertaken to audit housing benefit income and expenditure within the financial statements. That is work which would previously have been done as part of the certification of the housing benefit subsidy claim, but we are no longer the reporting accountant for that claim, and therefore we had to undertake it separately for the financial statements. That remains subject to agreement with management and the PSAA.
Okay, there's going to be a big fight over £382. I relish that.
Hopefully not, but...
Okay, any points of question, members? Hugh, please.
On page 98, you talk about impact, focusing on the future. The Council will need to undertake a detailed exercise to identify all of its leases and capture the relevant information for them. Is this a statutory requirement that we will need to do this, or is it just your advice that we will need to do this? And if so, what would you suggest would be the timescale within which we could do it?
So it is a requirement. It's not something that we're advising. This accounting standard will be adopted for public sector bodies currently it's expected to come into effect in 2020-21. It has already been subject to a one-year deferral to put it back to that date, but that's the current expectation. So it will be adopted within the code of local authority accounting, so the council would need to apply it. My understanding is, and I think Michael mentioned something at the briefing, that the council has work underway to identify all of its leases. The key thing will be that at the moment there's a differentiation between an operating lease and a finance lease in terms of what the council does or does not show on its balance sheet. That differentiation effectively disappears under IFRS 16, and so the council will be recognising assets under operating leases on its balance sheet, whereas it doesn't currently do that. So what we would propose to be doing in this year's audit for 1920 is to discuss with officers further and to look at what they've been doing to review the council's database of leases for completeness and to understand where these operating leases would need to come onto the balance sheet as at the 1st of April 2020, assuming that it does go ahead and get adopted and doesn't get deferred further.
Donna?
Thank you very much. Under the section about MRP, you note the change in the calculation of the MRP being to an annuity-based system. Whilst that's agreed and signed off and that's all okay, is it normal for a council of this size, for a unitary authority? I mean, do Southampton and Brighton, do they use that system? And could you also just explain what system was used before to calculate the MRP that resulted in the overcompensation, or, the overpayment?
I'll try my best, because we use a specialist for this piece of work because it is inherently quite complex. But certainly, I can't comment on specific other authorities, but it's quite common for authorities to have amended their approach to MRP in the last few years. A lot of authorities did move to an annuity basis, and that is an acceptable method under the regulations. It does have the impact in a lot of cases of resulting in effectively a calculated amount whereby you're saying we've over-provided MRP up to the point that we've remade that calculation, and as such then you offset that over-provision against the requirement in future years to reduce that. And some authorities have used that as a mechanism for trying to then stabilise their financial position, and so that when the MRP kicks back in, the authority is in more sort of sound financial place. So previously, the MRP would have been calculated effectively straight line. The annuity method is based on the usage of the asset and the fact that as it becomes older, it starts to get used up more quickly, and so the MRP charge, rather than going like this, effectively goes like this, and therefore your over-provision is the difference between the two that you have charged historically, and I think you could backdate that to about 2008 from the point that you made the calculation change.
In cash terms, do you know how much roughly that is? Or not off the top of your head? I mean, if you don't worry, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm just wondering if you know approximately.
I think officers would be able to answer that better,
okay.
But it's in the millions of pounds, the over-provision amount.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, David, for that report. There's no recommendation. Thank you for the update. Thank you. Item 9, audit performance status report to 4th of September 2019. I'll hand over to you, Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully the coloured copies are there.
We had a coloured copy, don't you?
Yeah. Yes. However, from the next reporting period, I won't put in coloured copies, but hopefully we can make it quite explicit within a couple of the areas that if it was grey, it wouldn't really make much sense. So we report to you, obviously regular basis, say how we're doing it in relation to the plan. We are on target with the plan. We've made some amendments to how the report looks. So could I have some feedback as to whether actually it's a little bit more transparent, or do you know what, it's not transparent at all? There aren't new areas of concern to bring to the table, but there are the two areas which Tristan attended for, which is the home to school transport and the hire cars, which are in draft. We will bring it along to you at the next meeting because we only report them when they are final, and we're all optimistic things would be able to be evidenced and it will be in place. So there's no new areas of concern. We are progressing with the plan, and to be honest, it is to take any questions you may have in the format of the report and any of the contents of the report for any audits that we have already completed.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Well, my first comment is it's much better than the previous reports. The format, I have to say, I sort of understand it. Liz, I was a bit, you and I have spoken privately over a coffee about various things, but one of the things I'm concerned about over the years were when we have an action plan and then things are taken off it for various reasons. Now, if you look at the top of page 111, from Harbour School down to capital accounting, they have either been deferred or there are various reasons for not doing it. How satisfied have you got to be as internal auditors that people aren't trying to push things under the table or trying to get away with something? Will you sit down with whatever the department is and have a long talk with them, and do you have to be persuaded? You have to be persuaded that it needs deferred or whatever?
I'm very precious about our independence. So in actual fact, for all of these, very often it is the preliminary research at the beginning of the audit which will determine then, is it going to come off the table? There are some areas where we get asked to defer, but I will sit down with the relevant director or senior officer to get me to understand why is it we are taking it off the table. Very often it's because for example, if there is an Ofsted coming in or any other inspectorate, I think the duplication, but no, I'd like to be quite robust with, I'm not going to take it off. And I think the senior management team actually respect that. I have had many occasions where I've said, I'm really sorry, we are auditing.
I just asked one specific question on one of those, which is mental health. It doesn't give, so that would have been done. It doesn't give a time scale for that. I mean, it's a big issue for many people, and I just wonder, i.e. the mental health issue itself, right? I just wonder if that will come back on in the next, for the next audit, or when, or is it put off for some time in the future because of this, deep dive?
The reason I'm comfortable to take it off is if we look at the expenditure within the area of mental health, there are three prominent areas, two of which we've already audited. The remaining one was the health visitors. I've taken it off the table because they'll have the deep dive, but I want to reconsider it again, depending upon the results of the deep dive, with what came out the back, and for the normal risk assessment for 2020-21. So I am looking to potentially put it back in the plan for that period, but because the other two significant areas had been covered, if they hadn't, I would probably have swapped it.
Thank you, Liz. Donna?
I'm going to pick my words quite carefully here. About 18 months ago, at the end of our tenureship as the administration, it came to my knowledge that there was a department in the council that had, for a very long period of time, refused to play ball. And that had resulted in some significant issues, which resulted in a lot of money needing to be spent. And when we sat down with the new, it was Michael, you, me, and Luke, I was shocked that the director of that service was able to say, no, I don't want that to happen. And I then put it to Michael and Lizzie, well, surely you have the right, Michael particularly, to direct Lizzie in, and off it goes. It must happen. These things have to happen. And there was, I don't know if the rules are changing, if they haven't, I think it would be worth gas considering this to empower you guys for what you do. Well, you said, well, yes, but we do still need consensus with the team that we're going into. You know the one I'm talking about, don't you? And it really was a big concern, and I was furious when I found out. But then we were going into PERDA and everything's happened. In fact, we might have just gone into PERDA actually. But I just wonder whether you need us to empower you to be able to have more of a no, I'm coming in. I know you can if you think there is a big issue, but this was just a general audit that needed to be done as like every other department in the council, and you were getting a stonewall and had done for a really long period of time. Now I know there's been a change of director, so that may have brought a whole new culture, and I'm just looking through the ones you've got on the go. I've seen one so far, I haven't quite got to the end of the list, and it's got 3 highs so that's not particularly encouraging either, but at least you're getting through it, at least you're now getting the information which you weren't before. So maybe through you, Chair, if Lizzie could answer some of that.
I remember it very well, and there has been a very clear change in culture. I think the issue that we face on occasion, and we do our darndest to try and manage, is a passive resistance. So I think, and I can remember the scenario, we actually went ahead with the audit. What we had was an almighty denial around the results, and then I think there was a little bit of an attempt to try and deflect the severity of the issues that were being put on the table. And we do have pockets of that, less so. Audit is always evidence-based, so we will push back and say, you think we're a bunch of numpties and we do not know what we're presenting. However, you give us the evidence that supports that it is not what we're presenting, then we will change the findings. We're not going to change the findings if you go and implement everything now, because the audit's a position in time. So maybe picking up on your point, the one thing that would probably definitely help us, because we do, so I don't have a door closed, but I do in a sense perhaps where we will do our darndest to get hold of the information and people are just not playing ball for whatever reason. And one of the things that we've incorporated in this report is that we tell you when we've triggered an audit and how long that audit is taking. Because if I start saying to you, look at the time that we started that, and the reason there's delay is we're not getting the information, I think that's where it would be really helpful for you to support us, because I think the organisation, and particularly that directorate, is far more forthcoming, sees the added value that we could bring along to the table. You will always get some resistance in some pockets, and as long as we understand that it is not a deliberate, we're not going to help you because, do you know what, we don't want you to uncover this, we might need you to perhaps nudge or challenge us, Lizzie, why is that taking a length of time? And then we can do it from that angle.
I would just like through Peter and through David, or through Gas, to direct to Peter and David that they are absolutely empowered, and the Chief Executive should have been, as should the Deputy Chief Executive, Michael Lawther, and that was my point when I had the conversation with Lizzie. I instantly turned to Michael and said, well, what are you doing about it then? Because you're the Deputy Chief Executive, and if it were me and I was the paid member of staff here, I'd be saying to this particular director, do it, and if it's not done and we haven't got an action plan within 2 weeks, come back and tell me why. But I'm really pleased to hear there's been a culture change. I'm not surprised at all. I thought that would be the case. But sometimes large directorates, the cultures are really difficult to break down, aren't they? And I just thought if you need any help through Leo and the permanent gas team, of which obviously I'm not one of them, but then, you know, I think that's something that gas could really do to help you guys, because I don't think you should be having to battle that hard to do your jobs. I think it's wrong. But anyway, there you go.
In terms of the sort of legal position, A, that person's got a contract of employment. B, that person's got an implied term as to utmost trust and faith, and that means essentially doing what the head of paid service would expect in an employee-employer construct. And from my own perspective, I have no difficulty whatsoever in supporting Lizzie in respect of inviting people to be assisting in their inquiry, so to speak.
And I was going to say, I really welcome the support, so thank you. And I do find this committee immensely supporting, and certainly over all of the years. You need to have comfort and trust in me that I also have the ability to say no and to fight a number of battles. I'm kind of used to fighting battles because that's the nature of audit. But I will bring to your attention any particular pockets where, do you know what, they're just not playing ball.
Section 10, pages 14, 15 and onwards. The follow-up audits which have been completed, the ones which worry me was some of those which we've got, the original assurance level was just limited assurance, and the follow-up, it stays limited assurance, that nothing has changed. One in particular stands out, which is city twinning, which would have implications beyond the realms of the city and the city council. It might impinge upon our public reputation much more widely. And so could you advise on that one in particular, and also on the others where there seems to be no change from the original audit?
I'd actually, prior to this meeting, a week or so ago, had a conversation with the relevant director in that particular area to bottom out, really, the lack of the movement. And he has been very proactive with kind of following up to ascertain, well, okay, hold on, why have we got a little bit of a block and a barrier? On the twinning one, there were a number of discussions that were to be held with members, and I think they've been slightly delayed. So I think that has now progressed, and I think there was a change in the relevant portfolio holder perhaps at the time that has influenced that particular one. In relation to any of the areas, though, that aren't significantly moving, we've had agreement. What we're going to do is we're actually going to, and we have already put this in place, is we trigger with every single client, internal client, we're going to be coming out to do an audit. This is when we're going to be coming out, and it is a month, if not more, in advance. When we've got these areas, though, that there is lack of movement, we are, instead of just doing a follow-up and then taking it off the table, we're actually having more conversations with the directors concerned to say, what is it? Because we need to understand. We also need to revisit, to be honest. If something remains open, is the risk still the same risk? And there are some occasions where, yes, it's still relevant, it's still open. There are some other occasions when perhaps the agreed action wasn't the best action, and we need to revisit what it is that we need to do as an organisation to plug the gap. So in relation to any area which is under culture, leisure and regulated services, since this was drafted, things have subsequently moved. And if you have any particular areas, I can bring an update back to you at a subsequent meeting to say, there was no movement then, but you know what? There has been movement now.
I think that will be very useful, because the lack of movement says something to us and raises concerns in our mind about the management of those areas. And so it would be useful to have a report back until you feel that you are satisfied there is nothing further which gives you cause for concern.
I think the added bit is, for me, inactivity on agreed actions plays into my annual opinion. And the organisation we had less limited and no assurance audits last year than we had in the previous 2 years. But what's holding back with changing the opinion is they're not implementing these. So you are quite right, and that is what we would do. And a number of the directors that I've already had conversations with have been really bought into the concept because they want to move things on as well.
Could I just ask members, you've been around for a while particularly, and yourselves, whether you like the new format. I do, but is it, John, you've been formatting, critical of formats in the past. What do you think of this format? Not on this report. Okay, no, but on your format.
The commentary is still on there, and yeah, which when we had the previous one, which was an Excel spreadsheet, there used to be an overall summary right at the very end, which is probably around a similar size. If there is no assurance ones, though, I would be bringing you practically the whole report. But if you want additional information, that I'm more than happy to put it in. It's probably just gauging the balance with how much information you want.
I think with that caveat, in terms of the criticals, we're always trying to strike a balance here in terms of the information we have against being able to interrogate it, adequately. So, okay.
Sorry, just one final technical question, not technical, specific question, I should say. Under PCMI, 3 high-risk exceptions, which all seem to be around governance and stock control and blah, blah, blah. There was a little bit of a not great culture there, we know, with management, and that's changed. So are things on a journey there, or do you still think they haven't changed and that does need addressing in terms of the culture there?
No, I think there has, because there's been a change at all levels, I think. And certainly at the operational level, for me, is probably having the most amount of impact in this particular area with getting the appropriate controls in place. So yes, I do think it is better.
Okay, members, we're asked to note the audit performance for 1920 to the 4th of September, and to note the highlighted areas of concern in relation to audits completed from the 1920 audit plan, including follow-up work performed. Is that agreed? Thank you. Can I move on to the penultimate item, which is scrutiny call. Sorry. Commission. Scrutiny call-in arrangements. Okay. This is I think Simon posted to be first and started this about January, so we're getting somewhere. The 40 war's been going on since January. Well, we've actually got something on a bit of paper here, which you will see, and it mainly comes, and I think he's got a very valid point, many in relation to the 2 that we did last year that took a horrendous amount of time actually for scrutiny management to call in, so there are some recommendations in relation to that. But the paper's been written by Stuart, so I'll hand over to you, Stuart.
Don't have a lot more to say, Chair. As you said, Councillor Bosher sought a number of revisions to the call-in process, including tightening up the timescale and the inclusion of more information should the panel refer a decision back to the original executive decision maker. There are some suggested changes for consideration in paragraph 4, and if the committee were minded to support those, there's some associated constitutional revisions as part of the appendix, and again, if you were happy to support that, as it's changed to the constitution, then it would go on to full council. So hopefully in the bold I've set out, I tried to address each of Councillor Bosher. Happy to go through them all. I'll be guided by you, Chair, as to how much detail.
Well, Simon Bosher, to be fair to him, give notice a couple of weeks back. He came to the pre-meeting to say that he wouldn't be here today, so I did ask that this final report be sent to him in advance. Hopefully that happened. Were there any comments back from Simon?
Spent 40 minutes on the phone to me.
You're lucky. In essence, it's just making sure that people aren't hanging about for weeks and weeks waiting for an SMP. Is that okay? So in essence, it's making sure people don't hang about. One of them, I think, in a prison report was 14 weeks haven't been called in to be heard. And I think the other one was about 6 weeks. Is that right? Something in that. Yeah, the two that were done last year. Go on, Donna.
The key part then under 4, which is the, and 4, if the call is successful and the subject report is referred back to the portfolio holder or cabinet for recommendation, the original unaltered report should not be the subject for reconsideration. Yeah? Okay, fine. All right. And he didn't make any comment about that to you then? Okay, fine. All right, that's good. I mean, it makes sense because it's just a double calling otherwise, isn't it? So
That's right,
yeah.
that's what we want to avoid.
Now, Peter, does this go to full council, or is it just seen as a minor amendment? It's got to go to full council. Oh, well, there you are. Another you'll have an opportunity in 2 weeks' time. The excitement of the next council meeting.
I guarantee you he will object to speak on it.
Yeah, of course you will. Of course you will. Yeah. We're back to, as you see, we haven't put down a date for the next meeting because it's been difficult trying to get members together. Now, members have been surveyed? Yes. Yes? Yep. I wasn't, mind you, but there again, I told I was going, right. As a result of consulting panel members, it appears that 5 out of the 6 members can make Tuesdays at 4 o'clock. On that basis, are the panel happy to confirm that day and start time for future meetings? It's great having the standing deputies, but I'm a bit concerned. I mean, Simon and Neil are missing, aren't they? And I just wonder if that suits them.
I mean, yeah, he works in London and he leaves home at 6 in the morning and he gets home very late and he works, I think, from home on a Friday. So is it worth asking if everyone else can do Friday? I mean, I don't think hold it up just for him if need be. Oh, okay, fine, all right. Well, in which case, if it needs, we've got standing deputies for a reason, so if one of us needs to come along, and also you've got a November meeting and then probably February or March? Well, with no disrespect to him, he's not restanding because of his job, so he's got 2 more meetings and then he's going to be off anyway, so I think you should go with what's good for you.
Donna, thank you for that. That's very useful. Yeah, so we'll then go to Tuesdays, which means that the next meeting will be the 26th of November, and then the one after will be the 3rd of March. But we'll put those in the minutes. It's okay, and then is that all right? Members, thank you very much for turning up this afternoon. Thank you for a very, very good governance and audit meeting, and I wish you well for the weekend. Thank you. And thank you, Matthew, for turning up.